Could China reach great polar power status? With the world's major shipping routes facing crippling disruptions, China is making inroads into the Arctic. But after launching a regular commercial service through the North Sea route, could unforeseen political and environmental consequences sink the effort, or will Beijing claim a new frontier? I'm Andrea Sankin. Today's Newsmaker is China's Polar Silk Road. From the Strait of Hormuz to Bab el-Mandeb and even the Panama Canal, the world's major shipping routes are facing economically devastating disruptions. So it's no surprise for major trading powers to seek new, less conventional passages. Enter the icy alternative of the Arctic. It's been tried before, but never became truly safe or cost-effective, arguably until now. China's Sea Legend has just launched a regular container service that cuts shipping time to the UK by more than half. It has its environmental risks and political complications, but if it works, it could give China a serious trade advantage. Here's a look.
For over a century and a half, the fastest way to travel by sea between Asia and Europe was via the Suez Canal. But China is beginning to take advantage of a new opening at the top of the world. Following successful trials in 2025, a Chinese shipping company announced in August that it was starting regular container shipping services via the Northern Sea Route. The route passes through the Arctic Circle, skirting Russia's frigid northern coastline and territorial waters before arriving in Europe. It stretches roughly 13,000 kilometers and takes anywhere from 18 to 21 days. The traditional course via the Suez Canal is considerably slower, taking around 40 days, nearly double the time and nearly double the distance. For Beijing, it's a strategically tempting alternative to some of the world's maritime choke points, like the Strait of Malacca and the Suez Canal. While China is not an Arctic nation, a regular commercial maritime service goes some way to bolster its presence in the region.
China is willing to work with Arctic coastal countries, including Russia, as well as other interested countries, to strengthen international cooperation in infrastructure construction and operation along the Northern Sea Route, and jointly promote the development, utilization, and environmental protection of the route.
But there are downsides. The route is still seasonal, blocked by ice in the winter months. Ships have travelled the Northern Sea Route before, but they've usually been research vessels on exploratory missions or for specific purposes. It's still too dangerous for huge container vessels that ply the world's other oceans. The vessels China is using are modest in comparison. Shipping through a delicate ecosystem also carries ecological concerns. The route takes ships far from seaports, maintenance, or rescue in the event of distress at sea. Maritime insurance costs are higher, and it runs through Russian territorial waters.
The importance of the Northern Trans-Arctic route as the safest, reliable, and efficient path is becoming ever more obvious on the backdrop of disruptions of the global transportation chains, which occur due to numerous conflicts, including, as we see now, in the Middle East.
Permits to transit the route are awarded by a Russian agency operating under Russia's state nuclear authority, Rosatom, and Russia commands hefty fees for the use of icebreakers in the event they are needed. Sanctions placed upon Russia by Western nations as a result of the Ukrainian war mean Russia doesn't permit access to ships of nations it considers unfriendly. But that works in China's favour. Its use of the Northern Sea Route will only strengthen an already deepening relationship between Moscow and Beijing. China is not alone in its desire to use the route. South Korea sent its first commercial vessel through the passage just days after China. And South Korea is heavily expanding the port of Busan, hoping to transform it into a greater maritime hub. For now, the route remains seasonal, more expensive, and dependent on Russian authorities. A warming Arctic represents new geopolitical challenges, but for some, it also represents irresistible maritime opportunities.
So, will China's Belt and Road Initiative fully secure its Arctic routes and make the country a great polar power? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Tromsø, Norway, Professor of Political Science at the Arctic University, Marc Lanteigne; from Washington, Secretary General of the International Military Council on Climate and Security, Sherri Goodman; and from Hong Kong, international and independent China strategist, Andrew Leung. Thank you all so much for being with me. Let's first look at some of the geopolitical issues really around what's happening. Sherri, China will argue it is innovating in trade and strategy like any responsible nation would do. But the view from primarily the United States is that China's presence in the Arctic poses a national security threat. So who's right here?
Well, Andrea, really both views are right in the sense that China does see this perhaps first and foremost as a commercial opportunity, but every commercial opportunity also brings strategic opportunity and strategic implications. So, China, by further developing its Polar Silk Road, a concept it first put forward in 2018, but now is operationalizing with ships going through the Arctic now on a planned regular basis, is creating another important sea lane through the Arctic, which will have both strategic implications in terms of releasing it from control of other straits around the world, the Strait of Hormuz, the Straits of Malacca, and enabling it to have increasing choice and operational flexibility and capability to operate in various regions of the world, including in the Arctic. And we know that China sees all of its commercial activities as also dual use. We call it civil military fusion. And so for every civilian activity, there are also opportunities to monitor, conduct intelligence, and gain insights on how to position itself to operate any place in the world.
Okay, but why is that a serious threat to the United States, if it is?
Well, for the United States, we have been for many decades now undercapitalized in our investments in surface capability in the Arctic with icebreakers, which are limited. Russia has far more icebreakers. The U.S. plans to build more icebreakers, but is still in that process. And so while we have a strong strategic nuclear deterrent in submarines, we have our geography. It protects our homeland. We have to build up those defenses as the melting ice, climate change acting as a threat multiplier, makes these sea lanes more accessible and makes the commercial opportunities more accessible to all powers wanting to operate in the Arctic. So there's strategic competition going on for energy, minerals, and also control of the emerging sea lanes. The paradox being that climate change has made more climate polluting activities more accessible in the Arctic region.
Okay, well, let me ask Andrew Leung from China's perspective about this, civil military kind of hybrid that the United States sees and the military activity it could employ, that China could employ, that the United States is going to be watching very closely, and it apparently is trying to play catch up now, too. Should the U.S. be worried? Do they have a right to be worried? Or is it seen from the Chinese perspective as just this unfair aggression, at least even if it's just at rhetoric at this point right now?
Well, I don't think that Beijing sees it right from the very start in military terms. Don't forget that the Belt and Road Initiative, not just the Arctic, the beginning of the Belt and Road Initiative was launched in 2013 in Kazakhstan, basically in terms of energy security, because China sees China is the country, the largest country in the world, heavily dependent on the importation of energy through various choke points, including the Malacca Strait and the Hormuz. Right from the very start, China started the Belt and Road Initiative, which of course not only covers sea lanes, but also overland pipelines through Central Asia, through Eurasia. There's now much talk about middle corridor, even bypassing Russia through Central Asia. And all these pipelines overland were intended as a hedge against any kind of security threats when the Port of Hormuz or the Malacca Strait could put at risk. But with climate change, of course, the Arctic becomes more and more navigable, and it opens up a further avenue for the transportation of oil. Particularly with what's happening over the Strait of Hormuz, again, from a point of view of national energy security, the opening up of the Arctic is very important to China because, after all, the Port of Hormuz passes through about half of China's oil. But of course, China's the oil passing through the Port of Hormuz can also transit the
Okay.
pipelines which I talk about over
Yeah.
Central Asia and so on, not necessarily over the Arctic.
Okay. Let me ask Mark then. Because as far as the political consequences are concerned of China entering the space and being so far ahead right now in this space, I mean, how irritating, I guess, is it for the United States, which is a bit behind and is now threatening really to take Greenland, it would seem, partially to compensate for the fact that it hasn't developed logistically as far as China has, or Russia for that matter. So the United States has to just start now competing in that space where Russia and China are already ahead.
Yes, thank you. So China has had a few years, starting with the pandemic and then with the implications of Russia's full invasion of Ukraine after 2022. That really put a bit of a damper on China's Arctic interests. And there was the general perception that China was losing interest in the Arctic, that it was looking at other parts of the world. Well, this is a very strong signal from Beijing that no, we have not lost interest in the Arctic. We still consider the Arctic to be very important, not only economically, but strategically. And it also sees a window of opportunity. Right now, trying to define the US's Arctic policy has been very difficult. There are obviously the issues with Canada, with Greenland, a lot of concern about in the United States about icebreakers. And China is trying to put itself forward to say, okay, this is serious great power in the Arctic. We are the ones who are trying to learn more about the Arctic and develop the Arctic economy.
Right. But can China right now only succeed with the Northern Route Sea passage if Russia and China stay on good terms, so to speak?
Well, as was said, China is thinking very far ahead. Its first attempt at a civilian cargo ship transit was actually in 2013, a modified vessel called the Yangsheng. And if you look at China's Arctic government white paper from 2018, the paper is very specific that China not only sees the Northern Sea route north of Russia as being very important, but also potentially the Central Arctic, which right now is way too difficult to navigate. But let's go forward 15, 20 years. Beijing has been very direct to say, yes, we are interested in that route as soon as it becomes available. So there is a question of right now, Russia and China are very close. They're cooperating very closely in economic and Northern Sea route development, but things might change quite a bit in the next 2 decades.
Yeah, let me ask Sherri about that. I mean, could unforeseen political and environmental consequences derail the efforts that China is making into the Arctic now?
Well, I think if anything, they'll create more opportunities for China in the future. I do agree with Mark that China has a strategic view of its opportunities in the Arctic region over the long term. And while today it's the Northern Sea route that hugs Russia's shallow coast that is available for commercial shipping and navigation, in the future, the Central Arctic route could be open. Now, that Central Arctic route today is governed by a Central Arctic fisheries moratorium, which China, Russia, the United States, and many other countries have joined. And that prohibits fishing in the Central Arctic region, but allows all signatories, including China, to conduct research and assessment on the edges of that. And as fish stocks move further northward with climate change and warmer ocean temperatures, fish are becoming more productive, and fisheries will be moving northward, eventually towards that Arctic region. China's also a great fishing power, needs a lot of fish to feed its people. And so I sometimes see that in the future, one of the next commercial opportunities in the Arctic will be the fish. Now, that's decades away. And today it's still governed by a moratorium, but that moratorium will expire in the late 2030s or be up for renewal. Let me also just make the point that one of America's greatest strength in the Arctic region are our allies. Today, of the Arctic coastal states, of which there are 8, 7 of them are NATO allies of the United States. Finland and Sweden having joined NATO when Russia invaded Ukraine after 2022. Now, in 2022. So
Sherri,
that
before you
is
go further there,
important
though, I mean,
strength for the United States.
you consider it a strength, then do you worry about those relationships being compromised with the way President Trump has been approaching allies in NATO, including Denmark and other Arctic, so-called powers? It's not the most diplomatic take, and it is making people angry in certain countries that are supposed to be reliable partners.
Yes, I do worry deeply about that, and I think he's caused unnecessary trouble because, as Greenlanders have said, we're open for business, but we're not open for sale. We have we've had many military bases on Greenland since World War II, and we still have an important one. We have rights to have other ones. So there's no question that we can defend from Greenland our Arctic frontier and protect it from security threats.
Okay.
We should be careful in working with our Greenland. Our Greenland is, as part of Denmark, is a very strong ally.
Okay. I mean, Andrew, arguably alienating allies makes this even that much easier for China. And as far as China and Russia are concerned, their relationship is also arguably strengthened because Russia has also been isolated. Let me ask you, I mean, had Russia not invaded Ukraine, would the China-Russia relationship be what it is right now, especially in this Arctic cooperation?
Well, in fact, the two countries' economies are highly complementary even before the Ukraine war. Russia's economy is heavily dependent on export of oil. And who is the biggest customer? It's been China all along. And a lot of the Russian oil doesn't pass through the port of Hormuz, and it passes through pipelines direct from Russia to China. And of course, because of the war on Ukraine and the impact on China's economy, the Russia is even more dependent on China. And of course, the two countries are pushed together also by Americans' aggression or hostility to this towards these two countries. But as far as the Arctic is concerned, I don't think China's look at Arctic in military terms. As I said at the beginning, it is only a hedge at the moment against what's happening over Hamas, but it's also taking advantage of what climate change may open up other business opportunities. China, of course, is building icebreakers, but it's not only it's not just the military context. But as far as China and Russia is concerned, don't forget that there are two countries are not actually in a bloc, because there are also competition between China and Russia over influence in Central Asia. And of course, even the Belt and Road Initiative, because of what's happening over Russia, because of the Ukraine war, a lot of trade overland is using the so-called Middle Corridor, bypassing Russia and through Central Asia, like Kyrgyzstan and the landlocked countries.
Okay.
So that's China's whole strategy, and Arctic is only a part of the overall picture, mainly on trade, but also on national energy security.
Fair enough. So, Mark, going forward, long term, what do you see as the biggest logistical challenges in this space And do you foresee this really opening the entire Arctic? Is it unstoppable now, or could logistical challenges as well as environmental challenges, things could go horribly wrong given just the chance, the good chance that there will be a spill at some point in an area which will be so difficult to access for cleanup, and it will be heavy, heavy fuel in ice that makes it even more difficult to clean up. So where do you really see this going? Is it actually fully viable within the next few decades?
That's an excellent question. And I think a lot of it has to do with whether we're taking a short-term or a long-term view. Now, Russia has been touting for a very long time the idea of the Northern Sea route as the best alternative to the various choke points like the Strait of Hormuz or the Suez Canal. But the fact is, using the Northern Sea route now, even in the height of summer, still has its problems, still has its potential hazards. Everything from very difficult weather conditions to floating ice to all kinds of maritime obstacles that need to be dealt with. You can't simply put any cargo vessel in the Northern Sea route. It has to be properly rigged for Arctic conditions. And that makes using the route at the moment very expensive. And the other point, and this is why several Western companies, shipping firms, have opted not to use the Northern Sea route, is because the environmental concerns are very high. The aftershocks of an oil spill would be very severe. There is a concern that if we start to see more sea traffic in the Arctic, this will cause climate change to accelerate, warming conditions to accelerate. So it is going to cause a problem in trying to balance the need for alternative sea routes to these environmental realities. But the fact is the Arctic is becoming more open and it is becoming more international. In addition to China, the trip of the Dubai Tower, you have a South Korean cargo vessel also making the run. You have several other countries like India, Japan, UAE also looking at the Northern Sea route for future commerce. So it's going to be very difficult to put the cork back in the bottle at this stage.
Right. So that was actually my next question. I mean, that other countries are entering this kind of Arctic transit competition, if I can put it that way. So then you have the issue on the other side of Russia. Does it have to be open now to making these waterways fully international and arguably trying to monetize it then if they have to be international? Or can Russia kind of be sidelined here once this truly moves forward? More ice melts, these routes can kind of avoid the maritime designation of Russian territory and move around them. Where is that?
Yeah.
Andrea, if I
Moscow
could
is not exactly their
address
side.
that point, please, then I don't think, I think that Russia really wants to monetize the Northern Sea route and gain the currency from being the traffic cop on the Northern Sea route. That's been part of Putin's long-term strategy, and he's had aggressive goals for shipping across the Northern Sea route. Now, that doesn't make it safe. Oil spill risk, as you described, is a very serious consideration. Already 6 years ago, I led a tabletop exercise called Arctic Futures 2050, and the scenario was a oil spill involving a Russian LNG tanker and a Russian icebreaker, a Chinese LNG tanker and a Russian icebreaker escort, where there's an oil spill, a potential radioactive incident, and also a possible threat to human life involving search and rescue. So there are a lot of capabilities one needs to operate safely in the Arctic. Those of us old enough to remember the Exxon Valdez oil spill and what long-term damage that did to the ecosystem in Alaska. And that wasn't even in the Arctic. And as you noted, it will be a lot harder to clean up an oil spill in the Arctic, potentially in international waters where it's not clear who has responsibility in what sectors. So there
Right.
are a lot of risks in operating even in an open Arctic.
Yeah, let me get Mark's final take on that then, because then would it potentially just be a matter of time before the systems could be in place to deal with these, potential environmental disasters? Should there be some, and logistically shore up the entire area?
Yes, and that is a really tall order. I mean, Russia has the largest Arctic coastline. There is a lot of waterway that would need to be monitored properly. So any kind of search and rescue or any kind of cleanup would be logistically very difficult. Now, Russia is looking ahead to the day where it has more ports, potentially with outside or perhaps even Chinese financial support to set up that necessary infrastructure. This is not going to happen overnight, and in the interim, especially because Russia is in serious need of outside funding from wherever sources it can, there is a lot of concern that Russia might start cutting corners.
Okay. Andrew, quick final thoughts, 30 seconds.
Well, I think that there's, apart from all these accidents and whatnot, the implication for climate change is tremendous because as the Arctic becomes more and more navigable, as the Arctic ice is melting, it's going to cause sea levels to rise. It's going to cause currents to change, and also open up the kind of resources deep under the sea. And of course, all these implications would affect the dynamics of the sea routes in the Asia Pacific. All the ports would have less revenue, and I think that it would change the whole world's economy.
Yeah.
But I think the impact on climate change, apart from the ecological impact, cannot be underestimated.
Okay, Andrew, that will have to be the final word for this edition of Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with me, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.